All right, so we begin. My name is Ken Lindstrom. This is the Something Ventured podcast. This is the first minutes, the first seconds of a little journey we're going to go on together. You're welcome to join me on this journey. Let me tell you a little bit about what we are going to do here. It's another Silicon Valley podcast. There's a million of them. Why should there be one more? Hang on, I don't know how to work my equipment yet. We'll figure this out together, right? There we go. How's that? Radio voice. How about this? Welcome to the Something Ventured podcast. So let's start. You and I on a foggy day in San Francisco. I actually have a kind of funny story about that. But, whether you're living here in Silicon Valley, the capital city, or whether you're somewhere in the world and want to take a little look inside what goes on here, this podcast should be for you. And maybe this will work and maybe it won't. But there's sort of three things that I'm thinking about. First is to take a little look at what goes on here in Silicon Valley. And dark things happen here in Silicon Valley, not all the time. But people screw each other, and people screw each other. And that's kind of interesting, and no one ever really talks about it. Everyone just kind of congratulates each other on how kind of smart and genius they are, and maybe we'll take a little bit of a different, get a little different take on that. The second thing we want to do is get to know people, talk to people, and find out what makes them tick. Everyone in Silicon Valley, appears to have been hatched whole from Princeton and then went to Stanford and then networked around a little bit and started a company and sold it, and, I'm boring myself already. And we want to talk to people a little bit and back them up into their lives and understand what's gone on, how they got to this point. See if we can convince people to talk. Probably can't, but let's try it. And the third thing is let's learn a couple things. Let's learn a couple things together. I don't know what the topic is, SEO, how that works, how acquisitions work, how VCs buy companies from each other. I don't know. Let's figure it out. And let's do it in this medium of radio, I guess it is. There's a certain romance associated with audio, I think, going back to, and I would make this argument that the guys who were doing ham radio, if you don't know what ham radio is, back in the day, hey, look it up. There's a way to do that. But the guys who did ham radio did this crazy sort of mysterious thing where they would broadcast, and at night the ionosphere would change, and you'd be sitting in San Diego, where I grew up, and you'd hear a voice, and you'd piece it together slowly, and you'd realize, hey, that voice is coming from Australia. And today, when we have the internet and cell phones that call anywhere around the world, or Skype call, it's not that amazing. But back at the time, there was something about that. There was something about that in the early days of the internet too. And then there's radio. I worked in radio when I was in college, and there was something cool about that too. Just being in that studio, broadcasting out to the world where maybe two people were listening to you, which, by the way, is two more than are listening to this. So there's something about this. So this is not going to be a blog. This is going to be a conversation. It's a foggy day in San Francisco. That's a little story about that. You'll learn who I am over time, but let's just start here. Let me give you this piece of information. Every year I teach a class, literally a day at the Harvard Business School, and they did a case study for a company that I worked at. If you know what a Harvard Business School case study is, this will be interesting. If not, forget it. Go listen to WTF or something like that. So every case study, a Harvard case study, basically has people in a situation. A manager realizes production in his Malaysian plant is doing something, and there's a protest outside, and there's some supply, whatever the problem is, and you get all this data. And at the end of the case, they don't tell you what to do. The guy basically is sitting in his office making the decision, fade to black. And the funny thing about this is if you read these, there's always some atmospheric in these dry Harvard case studies. There's always some atmospheric, Bob looked out at the mountains of Denver with the snow coming in from the east as he thought about his problem. It's a little bit of pastiche that they do. And anyway, they interviewed me for this case study and all that. And I asked at the end, they were like, so what do you want that thing to be? And it turns out I had my choice. And I said, I'm in San Francisco and I'm as creative as the day is long. Why don't we say, as the fog rolled in over the hills? So, as we start this podcast, as the fog rolls in over the hills here in San Francisco. Actually, it's a lovely day. So, anyway, so let's talk. We'll talk today about a couple things that are going on in San Francisco this week. Google Glass. Okay, I'm kidding. One of the key premises of this podcast will be the following. I've listened to a bunch of Silicon Valley podcasts, and it seems like a bunch of guys telling you what's going to happen. Here's the deal. Nobody has any idea what's going to happen. Here's the deal. Nobody cares what anybody thinks about it. I find the least possible interesting topic of conversation to be what you think is going to happen with Google Glass. Here's what I think. I don't care. I can generate ideas. Oh, Google Glass is a way to, I don't know, get $1,500 from people who are smart or dumb enough to buy Google Glass. I have no idea. Couldn't care less. Anyway, a couple interesting things that happened here in Silicon Valley in the past week. A company called WhatsApp got acquired. It got acquired by Facebook. It got acquired for $14 billion. $19 billion is a combination of Facebook cash and stock, which was an excellent deal for Facebook. So the teeth gnashing that's going on in Silicon Valley is, oh my God, how can something created by 50 people be worth so much per person? And I don't know, Van Gogh created paintings that were worth $250 million per person, so it doesn't really bother me too much. But I think there's a couple of interesting implications to this. So the company WhatsApp is a messaging company that people use to text each other around the world. Its primary, the thing that primarily recommended it at first was the fact that you can send free text messages. In much of the world, SMS messages cost money to send. They cost 2 or 3 cents. And in countries that are poor, that's an enormous tax on people. This is the concept that if you sell cigarettes individually, as they do in some poor countries, a box of cigarettes ends up being sold on an individual basis for multiples of what a box of cigarettes would sell. There's no Costco in the Philippines. So anyway, this WhatsApp app became enormous around the world. If you look in the App Store in almost any country but the U.S., it's in the top 5. And they ended up with 450 million people using it. Now, Facebook has about 1 billion people using it. For those of you who aren't big on math, that's about twice as many people. WhatsApp, half as big as Facebook, acquired for about 15% of Facebook. So it kind of makes a ton of sense. And that's also probably a 5 to 10% move in Facebook stock price anyway, is the first thing that was interesting about it. The second thing is that's real money. And I think there's a lot of people in this world at different stages of life. You're in a hedge fund and you're thinking, wait a minute, $100 million acquisitions weren't interesting to me, who moves currencies and markets and governments. And $1 billion was somewhat interesting, but not really. $14 billion is actually quite interesting. So I'm not sure what move will happen there. Obviously, the hedge funds have already discovered Silicon Valley. And the second one is people, it's like when I was coming out of college, being a doctor was about the coolest thing you could do. And it's still an amazing thing you could do, but it was cool financially at the time. Now if someone's a doctor, you kind of go, oh, geez, tough way to make a living, but it's a noble cause. Then all the guys who just wanted to make money, and let's face it, there's a couple of those guys floating around Silicon Valley. Hopefully, we'll meet them. Those guys would go into investment banking, which put on a suit, a tie, and kind of act like a dick for a while, and you get rich. Well, you'd make millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars. You wouldn't make what these guys at WhatsApp made, which was something like $4 or $5 billion, which is an amount of money. You can have yourself some fun, and it's an amount of money you can do some good in the world too. So it'll be interesting to see how that settles in the minds of young people looking at careers and hedge funds. The hedge fund part, I think it's pretty clear what happens. More money piles its way into Silicon Valley for the moment. For the younger folks, I feel like what we're seeing in Silicon Valley, apropos of this, is people coming to Silicon Valley not with a dream, not like Steve Jobs or people like Jonathan Abrams who founded Friendster, who had an idea and said, hey, I think the world could be different. But rather people coming in and say, I'm going to create something that makes money. And if you view creating a startup as an artistic process, and that's a stretch, and that's probably ennobling us here in Silicon Valley more than we deserve. But if you look at it that way, imagine trying to create a piece of art that you sell for money. In a million years, you couldn't get there. So in Silicon Valley, the impact of that has been there's just a lot of annoying people around creating companies that nobody wants. By the way, all apps these days are in one of two categories. They are either apps that are chat apps, or they bring you lunch. By the way, Munchery raised $20 million this past week. That's a lunch company, not a text company. And the final thing what's interesting about WhatsApp is that Silicon Valley tells itself stories. It tells itself myths. The average entrepreneur is a guy in his dorm room starting a company. He's 23 years old, and he drinks energy drinks and wears a hoodie. All entrepreneurs are not Mark Zuckerberg. In fact, the average age of an entrepreneur in this country is 43 years old, believe it or not. There are several things that were interesting about the people who founded WhatsApp and created more value than almost anyone ever has in Silicon Valley. Not everyone. The first is that they were older. Those are air quotes. I think one of them was 42. One of them was 38. Silicon Valley can barely stand that, so they're referred to as being mid-30s, which is, I guess an approximation of what 38 and 42 average out to. I'm not that good with math. They created an app it worked on iOS and Android and all these things, but also on J2ME. It was one of the least sexy platforms, but was recommended by the fact that almost everybody in the world who isn't us or who isn't rich, and my definition of rich, the average person in the world lives on $1 a day. So this is the phone that people around the world were using, and people around the world adopted it. And I think Silicon Valley is kind of starting to wake up to the concept that there's a world outside of Silicon Valley, and it's big, and they have a lot of money. And the final thing, and this is less, kind of less of a thing, but they came from Yahoo. The classic thing is that people come from Google and start companies. People come from Facebook and start companies. As far as I know, that's actually never actually happened. To be a jackass about it, I don't think anyone's left Facebook and started a successful company. Anybody's left Google and started a successful company. People have left PayPal and started successful companies. They've left Netscape and started successful companies, but not Facebook and not Google. And that's the kind of provocative stuff we're going to say here, folks. Anyway, that's it. WhatsApp acquired for $19 billion. Moving on. What's next? There's a thing going on. It's not actually a thing here in San Francisco, but it's it's a long topic. We'll do this maybe on the next podcast. But let me lay the scene here in San Francisco. Remember, it's a foggy day. It's not this. So a bunch of tech workers, people who work at technology companies, have moved to San Francisco because they're in their 20s, and that's what people do in their 20s is they move to cities like San Francisco and Chicago, whatever. And many of them work in technology, so they get jobs at places like Google and Facebook, and places like Google and Facebook are located in Mountain View. And rather than these people buy BMWs and drive them to Mountain View every day on the 101 freeway, for those of you who aren't in Silicon Valley, that is the freeway that runs through the heart. I guess it would be an artery. Freeways are arteries. The artery that runs through the center of Silicon Valley. They got buses that these people take to work every day, and they're nice buses. I don't know what the hell a nice bus is. It's a bus, it's got Wi-Fi on it, which means they can work while they're on a bus, which yay for them. But a group of people in San Francisco has taken to sort of vilifying these guys. And there's a whole thing, Kristallnacht. We'll talk about that at some other point. We have to be really careful about how we talk about that because it's a crazy thing. But have taken to vilifying these people and protesting, which is kind of unfortunate. This is, San Francisco. Right? The thing that I will say about this at the moment, as I've thought about this, is that I'm surprised that the people who take the people who ride the Google bus have taken to saying things like, we spend money in San Francisco, we are good people, etc. This strikes me as being absolutely effing ridiculous that anybody who works at Google or any other company should have to defend that they're good people. It's ridiculous. It also seems fairly indefensible to me to protest a bunch of people who are riding a bunch of buses to work. They're riding buses to work. They might be nice buses, but they ain't airplanes and they ain't going to vacation. They are buses and they're going to work. Strange thing to protest, but the thing that strikes me, and maybe this is just my feeling about this, is the concept of newcomers go home, of immigrants go home in San Francisco. Your kind is not wanted around here, would not be tolerated. If we did that to any other group, I can't imagine. It just doesn't seem like it's acceptable. The city should be a welcoming place. And so I welcome tech workers. And by the way, there's like a couple thousand of them probably in a city of 750,000. It's something like that. There's a funny story in the paper that was a guy in the Excelsior district. If you don't know San Francisco, the Excelsior district, it's right near the epicenter of everything, but it's not the epicenter. It's a little bit off. It's a not as wealthy a neighborhood, and they interviewed a guy who had a business there, and he said, "Hey, please come gentrify me." So enough said on that. Well, I'll try to remember this Kristallnacht story, but it's a crazy tale, and it's one that we need to talk to. Kristallnacht was an artifact of Nazi Germany, and whenever you talk about Nazi Germany, you have to be enormously careful and enormously thoughtful. So we will save that for another time. So that is it for the first podcast. That's what happened in Silicon Valley this week. Buses got protested. That's kind of mundane. A company that didn't exist 5 years ago got acquired for $14 billion, which means there's a couple guys who can now do some good in the world, and we're looking forward to that. And that's it. If you have any ideas about what you want to talk about, who you want me to interview, I'm going to just find people. I don't care who they are, if they work in Silicon Valley and they're interesting and they don't have an opinion about Google Glass, that's who we're going to talk to. So this is the Something Ventured podcast. Eventually we're going to have a really cool intro. This will be really professional. In fact, let me do that for you now. This will be cool. You'll get to be here. Here, this will be the. We are now doing the rehearsal for the Something Ventured podcast. Are you ready for this? All right. Okay, so imagine music playing under this. If I'm talented enough, I'll go figure it out and I'll get music to play under this. But okay. Welcome to Something Ventured. You like that kind of a radio voice thing? Welcome to Something Ventured. Startup insider Kent Lindstrom explores the reality behind the Silicon Valley headlines as he sits down with the established veterans and up-and-comers who are shaping the way we view the world online and beyond. Yeah, we'll do something like that or we won't. A friend of mine wrote that for me, actually, who is a showrunner in Los Angeles. And he has mentioned that he or his friends, I was talking to him once, and he mentioned, I write for reality shows. I was like, wait, what? He was like, come on, you have to know. We'll talk about that sometime, too, the similarity of Silicon Valley and Hollywood. But anyway, that's it. I can be reached. I'm trying to think of which email to give everybody. You know what? I'll come up with an email that everyone can use to get to me. That is, I'll figure this one out. But anyway, I am Kent Lindstrom. That was the first edition. We'll interview people, so this will be interesting. This will not be me rambling. This will be me getting other people to ramble, if I can do that. That has been the Something Ventured podcast. I'm Kent Lindstrom, and I will talk to you next time.